Hello everybody. Please can you just type into the text box if you can hear me and see me clearly. Just wait for a few minutes just to see whether this transmission's actually going through successfully. Nothing yet. I'll wait for a few seconds to see if you can just respond and let me know that you can see me and hear what I'm saying clearly. Fantastic. So Ashley Brown, thank you. M. Bryce, thank you. Miss Lady, you can hear, that's good. Okay, it's a bit blurry, but you can hear you. Yep. Okay, thank you, Roland, and everybody listening. Let's get started. I apologize for the delay. We had a few technological hiccups at this end, but we'll just get started. My name is Anthony Bradley. I am the Regional Manager at Griffith University International Office. I look after a huge number of countries. I look after the USA, Canada, of course. I look after Sub-Saharan Africa and Central and Eastern Europe. So if we had students on the moon, I'm sure they would send me up there to do some talking as well. But so what we're talking about today is we're actually going to have a discipline-specific webinar. We're going to be talking about Griffith's criminology program. I have Kerry Wilmshurst here to my left, and he'll be talking in more detail about the program itself, the career outcomes, where you can go with it, the structure and nature of the program. But I just want to give you a little bit of background information about the university if you don't already know, because I understand that you've already met KOM Consultants. You would have met either Derek or Martin or Lisa or Matt somewhere in one of the colleges. And we've had a very long and very successful relationship with KOM. So I'm delighted to be able to do this sort of technological innovation here, these webinars. But in essence, we are a young university. Australia started its universities in the 19th century. As the population grew and grew and grew, we needed more regional universities, which is what Griffith University is. We are located in southeast Queensland, which is subtropical, which means in the summer it gets up to a sticky 38 degrees. And in the winter it's really, really cold here. Sometimes it gets as low as 16 or 17 degrees. So yeah, so bring your woolies and your ski jackets because, you know, 17 degrees is a fairly chilly temperature. We are a comprehensive university, which means we deliver programs across all academic disciplines, from accounting to zoology. We have about 45,000 students currently enrolled, and about 25% of those are international from more than 130 different countries. Canada figures very predominantly in our international student body because of the fantastic articulation pathways we have from the colleges in Canada. We have currently about 1,200 pathways from the colleges into bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and we're increasingly seeing people doing PhD here as well. So without further ado, what I thought I might do is I'll introduce you to Kerry, and he can give you a little bit about tell you a little bit of information about criminology. I, in the meantime, will monitor the screen for any questions coming in, and I can let Kerry know exactly what needs to be addressed. And if you do have any general questions, what we will do is, as we come to the end of Kerry's talk, I can address accommodation, I can address things like locations of campuses, we can talk about housing options, overview of programs, etc., etc. So keep the questions coming in, but at the same time, keep a good ear out for what Kerry's about to tell you. I presume everybody that's registered for this particular webinar is criminology focused. I noticed that you have police foundations here and crime investigations and things, so all of you will have the opportunity for fairly generous credit into our bachelor's degree. So let me just hand you over to Kerry. Kerry, if you take the stage.
I'll take the stage. Are we talking morning or evening in Canada? Or
I think it's about 7 p.m. yesterday in
Canada.
Canada.
Okay. Well, as far as we're concerned here, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I've actually been in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice now since 1991, which is when we started as a school. It was one of the earlier schools of criminology in Australia. What happened in the late 80s and the early 90s was there were a lot of inquiries around, well, many of the states in Australia, and what happened then was one of the recommendations that came out of all those inquiries was that people in law enforcement and generally working in the criminal justice system should have the opportunities of doing degrees in those areas. So our school started in 1991, heavily oriented towards policing, and we still do have a reasonably major emphasis on policing. A lot of students who come here to do a 3-year degree want to be police officers. And we've also got some leading experts here. In fact, I was only thinking this morning, Philip Stenning, who is one of our newer staff here. Philip's one of the major experts in the world on policing. And in fact, I think he worked in Canada for many, many years. So I guess my point there is that we still do have quite some emphasis on policing. However, the school has largely expanded now. We've got about 35 staff members and we've got a whole range of areas. I suppose our major focus would be areas like crime prevention. We've also built up our area of crime mapping. So we've got a whole range of areas now that you can. So we're looking here at some.
Will criminology be studied at the Gold Coast campus?
It is being studied at the Gold Coast campus right now. In fact, they're in their 2nd year down there. So certainly it is. We've just moved to the Gold Coast campus.
Recognisable in Canada?
Is the degree recognisable in Canada? Well, I guess all I can say is that I used to look after the Canadian students for several years. I haven't for the last couple of years. My understanding is it would be recognisable in Canada. Otherwise, I'm not sure why so many Canadian students come here to do the degree. It's a 3-year degree. It's a fairly flexible degree in that you can put it together. You can put together your own majors in a sense. We give fairly generous credit, which I can come back to in a moment, but as I understand it, it would be recognisable. But our first degrees are 3-year degrees.
Yeah, and I mean, simply on the back of the fact that Canada has a Commonwealth education background in the same way that Australia does, we've had little to no issues with students having their degrees recognised back in Canada. For some of the programs like engineering, there are special global accords like the Washington Accord, but as we have experienced, there have been no issues with students going back with our bachelor's degrees. Another question here, Kerry, is do you deal with offenders or is it mostly just theory?
No, in fact, the interesting thing I think about the Australian degrees when they were established was that we tended to balance those two areas. So we do certainly spend a fair amount of time on theory. By theory, perhaps you mean criminology, but we also spend a lot of time on the criminal justice system itself. So we do have a number of courses in rehabilitation for offenders. We have a number of people here whose expertise is in areas like dealing with youth sex offenders, for example. So, yeah, I think one of the things we tried to do in Australia was to try to balance those two areas.
Okay, with the tuition costs, I can answer that. Cala Brian, you mentioned the tuition costs. So Griffith University is not the most expensive place in Australia to study, but it's also not the cheapest place either. We're a middle range in terms of student costs. International student fees range from about $19,500 up to about $25,000 per year. Now, off the top of my head, criminology I think is about $20,000 to $21,000 per year. The criminology program, yes, it will be at the Gold Coast as well. J Stewart 123, so it will be at the Gold Coast campus. And Kerry, the question here from Roland Susi is Canada's criminal justice system similar to Australia?
That's an interesting one. We might come back to the Gold Coast in a moment, because I did mention a while ago that we've only started at the Gold Coast. So in fact, next year will be the first year that students are able to do third year courses down there.
Right.
Might need to bear that in mind, because Canadian students who come here actually get credit pretty well for first year, and they get credit for a number of electives. And so mainly if you came here, your program would mainly be second and third year courses. Now some of those courses are compulsory. Research methods courses are compulsory, the theory courses are compulsory, but you've still got the opportunity for about 7 or 8 courses to select them yourselves. But I just think you should bear that in mind if you think you're going to the Gold Coast, and the Gold Coast is a lovely place to go, but you need to bear in mind that it would only just be getting into its third year next year. It's still very much in early days for the Gold Coast. Now, our systems of justice, I would have imagined to myself that Canada would probably be closer to us than perhaps the United States. One of the things that overseas students often find difficult when they get here, for example, is that our policing, for example, is all done at the state level. So you don't have something like a Chicago police, Los Angeles. Now, in Canada, I'm not exactly sure how you organise your police services, but if you organise them at the provincial, state level, you're probably looking at a situation that's fairly similar. Certainly the youth justice system, which is the area that I teach, I mean, you'd have no problems making connections there.
Just a quick question. Canadian students are able to bring their OSAP loans over here, and if you are actually watching this from a province outside of Ontario, for example, the Albertan Student Loan Fund, the British Columbia student loans, you can actually bring those to Australia. We have a dedicated team of personnel that actually are quite familiar with processing those loans at this end. Do you have any? And also we mentioned scholarships. Every year we have 20 scholarships for Canadian college students. Now these are not full scholarships. They are to the value of $3,000 per student. They are competitive, so when you apply to us to study and you get an offer, then you make an application for the scholarship. So it's a good idea to talk about not only your academic prowess, but your community engagement as well. So if you are somebody that helps little old ladies across the road, or you train an ice hockey team, that's the sort of information we want to see in order to make you sort of eligible for that particular scholarship. Greg 392, having completed police foundations and now ramping up a grad cert, how many credits will I receive?
My understanding is that you would receive the same amount of credit. We tend not to. Now, we do have people here who actually work out the credit applications, but my understanding is that basically you get the same amount of credit. In other words, we don't add together qualifications and add them up so that you only end up doing 2 subjects, for example. So my understanding is you would probably get the same credit, that is half the degree.
I agree. For entry requirements, Bryce, the entry requirements are simply satisfactory completion of your college diploma at a score of 65% or more. And that is it, basically. Like I said, we have received, over the past 5 years, upwards of 2,000 Canadian students on these pathways, so it is a very tried and tested articulation road. And as long as you have successfully completed your college diploma, that is already mapped into a Griffith degree. If you are studying a program that isn't mapped, then we would need to review your actual transcript. But what's very important is that you do work with KOM consultants out of their Hamilton-based office, just so that they can fill you in on the administration side of things, how to apply for a visa, how to submit your application. Come abroad. Roland asked this question: is Canada's criminal justice system similar to Australia? I think we have already addressed that. In essence, I think the answer was yes.
Yes, yes. Yes, in the sense I think that you're not going to find too many mysterious aspects to our program here. Our programs, I mean, we're essentially both countries come from Anglo-European backgrounds. So again, you're looking at systems that are probably would have a number of similarities to them. I guess my point that I'm making here is that I don't recall that Canadian students in the past have had any difficulty in terms of acclimatising themselves to the system, understanding the system. The Canadian students usually do pretty well too. I mean, if you're completing your qualifications over there at the level of 65%, well, that's a credit mark in one of our courses here. So I've run into very few Canadian students who have problems academically. I mean, you know, some get homesick, understandably, but in fact, I think one of our Canadian students a couple of years ago went on and did our honours degree, which is a 4th year and is a research program. But I don't think you'd have any problems at all understanding the system here.
Yes, you can apply for the undergraduate and masters at the same time, I believe.
I'm not sure about
I would check with you. I mean, it's not normally a problem to apply for both undergrad and postgrad at the same time. Obviously, the offer that you get for the masters will be contingent and conditional on your successful completion of the undergrad. So there's nothing stopping you applying simultaneously for both programs, except obviously we cannot activate an offer for the masters until you finish the undergraduate. There's a question here for you, Kerry. Does the criminology program have practicum or placement?
We do. We actually have a 1-year course and a preparatory course that leads into it. But currently we do have a course that is based on 1 day a week in an agency. So students who choose to do that course, they spend 1 day a week at an agency. It might be a youth justice centre, it might be a police department somewhere, corrections. And then they usually do a project, and that's their assessment. So they do a project on their placement.
With respect to the criminology course, how many hours of class is there weekly, Monday to Friday and weekend?
Weekends, nil. We don't have classes on weekend currently, and I can't see that in the foreseeable future. A normal full-time load here would be about 12 hours a week of class time. Now that, again, that's probably an upper limit. That's based on 3 hours class contact time. 4 subjects a semester, 4 courses a semester is full-time.
If I can jump in there as well, you're probably saying to yourself, wow, 12 hours a week, that doesn't sound like much. But the difference between, say, the way a university and the university in Australia works and the college system in Canada is that you're expected to do a hell of a lot of outside independent work. So for every 1 hour that you have in class, you should be looking at 1.5 to 2 hours of independent work. You have your tutorials that you need to attend as well, plus you'll need to form work groups and study groups. There's a lot of independent reading expected. So even though when you come over as an international student, and particularly as a Canadian, you will be familiar with a lot of the aspects, the independent side of the learning is something that does take a while to get to grips with. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that. Each of our courses is worth 10 credit points, and 1 credit point is equivalent to 1 hour of either class contact time or study. So really what we're saying there is that each subject per week you're expected to put in about 10 hours worth of work. At universities, the bulk of work is done by you. In libraries, outside.
Now then, B.E.R. Jones. Why is there difference between the criminology and the honours criminology? In Australia, most bachelor's degrees are 3 years in length. The honours year is an additional 1 year that you are invited to join if you complete at a very, very high level. The honours year contains a research methodology program and a dissertation, is that right?
That's right, that's right, a thesis.
Yeah. A thesis, and so really is an extension of a bachelor's year by 1 year for those students that have achieved a very, very high graduating score at bachelor's level. Somebody mentioned living expenses. Now, living expenses in Australia are estimated to be between $17,000 and $18,000 per year. Obviously, that's an estimate. It's pretty much lifestyle based. So you can get away with spending a lot less if you're living off porridge and oats and you're not drinking any beers or eating at McDonald's. But you can also spend a lot more if you do have a rather sort of an outside lifestyle. So on average, a student will need between $17,000 and $18,000 per year living costs. It's also worth mentioning that international students have inbuilt in their student visa a work permit, which entitles you to 40 hours of work over a 2-week period. This is a part-time arrangement, and you can earn between $250 and $300. But it's worth mentioning that the priority is the academic studies. So students that are working too hard and falling behind in the studies should look back on cutting back on the work side of things. Is there support for international students if you're falling behind or feeling overwhelmed? Absolutely. Well, like I said, we have nearly 12,000 international students. So the students' welfare is paramount to us. We have a dedicated team of guidance and support counsellors that are able to monitor a student's performance. And as the allegory that I often use is that even though a Canadian student fits in very well with the psyche and mentality of Australian life, you are still a long way from home. So if your mum rings up to tell you that your pet goldfish has died, that's a little bit of bad news that has a big effect when you're a long way from home. So it's actually the extrinsic events that affect your academic performance. So if we see a student falling behind in grades, we will call them in, talk to them, put them in touch with other Canadians that have gone through similar situations. So the whole mentoring is a very, very integral part of Griffith University's ethos for international students. What is the employment rate for international students?
Well, employment rate, I'm assuming probably in Canada or here. I'm not quite exactly
okay,
sure.
I can talk about for Canadian students studying here, if you want to find part-time work and you can't, then there's something wrong. Pretty much 100% of students that want to find part-time work will find part-time work. But it is very important to be realistic in what you're looking for. For example, if you're doing a Bachelor of Criminology and Criminal Justice, it's not likely you're going to find a job as a part-time criminologist consultant. Most of our international students do work in pubs and clubs and restaurants. You may find work on campus in the administration sector, but now Roland, in terms of post-graduation career outcomes for criminologists, Kerry, you might be able to mention that.
It does appear to be good in Australia when we look at the employment rates and the employment statistics for our students. They are high. Now, admittedly, some of those students would have been employed in that area to begin with, in security. The employment rate does appear to be pretty good, because I think one of the things you've got to bear in mind about criminology and criminal justice is you're doing a degree there which is basically a social science degree with a specialisation in criminology. Now that means that there's a very broad area for people to work in, including many of our graduates who go on never to work in the criminal justice system. They get work in a whole range of other areas, the sort of areas that you'd expect any social science graduate to get work in: private industry, government jobs, etc.
I'm just looking at Jay Fulso. Yes, we have student housing and accommodation. On 4 of our 5 campuses, you have on-campus accommodation. You're probably looking at about 200 plus per week on campus. We do recommend international students spend at least 1 semester on campus. Now, a calendar year is 2 semesters. That's KKLA. That's an interesting name. If you've done a 3-year diploma, you can complete your degree in as little as 2 semesters. I believe, and we need to check the arrangements that we have with your college, but students generally come into the final year of the Bachelor of Criminology and Criminal Justice if they have completed a 3-year diploma. Perhaps somebody, Martin or KOM Consultants, can actually just verify that. But the maximum amount of credit you will get will be 2 years into a 3 years bachelor's degree. A lot of students will come in at exactly the halfway point. Destiny da Silva, how do you find housing outside of residence? We have an accommodation office here that will help you with that. We don't recommend that you do it from Canada because an internet picture of a house might look very, very different from the house in reality when you get here. So it's well worth spending a little bit of time in temporary accommodation or on-campus accommodation before you look at off-campus residence. We pay weekly here. Anything you'd like to mention about the program itself in terms of students that you've seen come in?
Oh, we have about, I guess we'd have about a dozen Canadians would come in perhaps. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that particularly this campus in the past has had a lot of experience with Canadian students who also come to do education degrees to go back and work in Canada. So we've certainly been used to Canadian students now for probably the courses off here. And as I say, a very, I'm looking at another one here. Oh, what's the fail rate of criminology students? Interesting thing about failure in universities nowadays is that you don't actually get that many dinkum failures. That I think there's an Australian term.
A dinkum failure.
A dinkum failure. That is a person who actually enrolled in the degree and just wasn't up to doing it. What you tend to find is that the failure rates often come because of lack of completion of assessment. And in fact, you'd probably find it surprising the number of students who often enrol in programs and for whatever reason, and there are a whole range of reasons, but often just don't complete the requirements, and that's where the failure rate tends to come from. I mean, I'm not very aware nowadays that you'd have too many students at all failing simply because they can't handle the work. So it varies quite a bit, but if what you're concerned about is the level of work, I don't think that's the thing to particularly worry about. I think the thing you've got to be concerned about is time management, being able to get on top of things, being able to organise your life, being able to organise your studies, and those sorts of things.
And another thing about failure is that when you might mention failure, what we tend to talk about is an attrition rate, which is the rate that students drop out. Now, the attrition rate in Australia is much higher for Australian students than for international students. We recognise the fact that international students are making a very, very large financial investment, and so the option of just dropping out is just not there to the same extent as it is for Australians. On top of that, you're actually only here for 18 months, for 3 semesters. And so as long as you are taking advantage of the facilities and the guidance counsellors and the professors that we have here, you are not thrown to the lions. You're actually, it's in everybody's best interests for you to take advantage of the libraries, the tutorials, the study programs, the extracurricular activities, so in order to get through the program. So I guess from an international perspective, the dropout rate and the failure rate is probably lower than it is for the Australian or domestic rate. Somebody mentioned spiders. You ever seen a spider in Australia, Kerry? I've never seen any spiders.
Spiders, no, you don't need to worry about poisonous reptiles and spiders and snakes and things. Everybody talks about that overseas, but in fact you very rarely see them in urban areas.
It's we tend to over sensationalize our wildlife in this country. Although that we do have some very large lizards here on this campus.
On this campus, yes.
I walked past some very large lizards this morning, about this big, looking quite hungry. They were too. Yes. How's the rugby, Hank? The rugby is fantastic. It's my sport of choice, and so you'll find that there's plenty of rugby to watch. I know you Canadians are actually getting better at rugby, particularly in the sevens. Now then, Miss Lady, you finish your diploma next April. How can you apply for entry into semester 2? Very, very easily. I would suggest that you contact KOM Consultants, and they will talk you through every step of the process. Their role is to essentially hold your hand all the way to the airport, put you on the aeroplane, we will meet you at this end and hold your hand from there on. The next semester starts in the end of July. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you have finished at the end of April or May in Canada, you will have enough time to make it for semester 2 entry. Is there a girls' rugby team?
A girls' rugby? I'm actually still struggling with this concept of rugby, actually. Coming originally from the southern states, where Australian rules football people, rugby. I would imagine there are. I mean, there are certainly girls' soccer teams. Yeah. As far as rugby goes, I'm not really sure about a girls' rugby team.
I would imagine there is, Ashley, and I guess the beauty of the sort of the sporting activities here at the university is that in addition to the 100 clubs and societies that we have, if there's something that you cannot find, you can actually petition the Student Guild for startup funding to create your own club. So, Ashley, if you are a girl rugby player, a female rugby player, by all means, and there isn't a rugby team, by all means, I'm sure if you started one, you'd find plenty of takers. What's life like outside of school? What activities do students take part in? Okay. We recognise also that international students want to integrate with Australian people as well. It's not just about being an international student. You want a flavour of being Australian. So we have an organisation here called Student Links, and they arrange after-class activities, barbecues, treasure hunts, trivia nights, surfing competitions, beach parties. I am originally from England. I'm not sure if you can tell that from the accent. No?
No, I wouldn't have picked you at all for it.
No, that's it. I've lost my English accent. But I came here about 10 years ago, and I can genuinely attest to the fact that your outside class lifestyle is fantastic. But look, don't take my word for it. If you hop onto your Facebook page and look at the Canadian Students Association on Griffith International, you will find that it has about 3,000 members. And it is used as a forum for bargaining, selling microwaves, trading bicycles, putting parties together, announcing where the next party is going to be. So the Canadian Students Association is a very, very active part of the Griffith University international community. Jay Fulsos, graduating in June, would it make more sense for me to start there in July or wait until your next semester? That's entirely up to you. We often feel that students benefit from finishing college, take a bit of time, find a job, make some money, and then apply for the following semester. You don't want to leave it too long though, because that window of opportunity will close. You might get married, take out a mortgage, buy a dog, and as soon as you make big life changes like that, your window of opportunity for international study does get smaller. In saying that, we will recognise a diploma for up to 5 years. So by all means, take time, or if you just want to make a bit of money, that's your decision. Can you get a link to that Facebook page? Yeah, I'll just let Kerry talk off the cuff a little bit about it. And what I might do is I'll try and find the link to the Facebook page for you.
Yes, I was going to say in terms of beginning, certainly most Australian students would begin their university programs in semester 1, and semester 1 begins in February. Having said that though, many students mix their programs between first and second semester, so I don't think you'd really have any problems at all coming in mid-year. On the other hand, I've also been told that students who graduate mid-year often find it easier to find jobs too, because they're not competing with all of those students who are graduating at the end of the year. But I think, as I say, when you look at our program here, we once did have majors. We'd have majors in policing, we'd have majors in corrections, etc. What we've now got is a whole range of courses, and basically students put their own majors together, and there's people here who can advise you on that. But it really comes down to the sorts of things that you're interested in now. So I can imagine a person putting together a major virtually in that whole investigation, crime mapping type area. The areas that I teach in, I mentioned youth justice a while ago. The other area I teach in is crime and media. So we've got a whole range of those sorts of courses. And the other point that was made earlier, I think also, I think you do need to be aware of that it is possible that in colleges you spend a lot of time actually in the classroom. On the other hand, Australian universities, they'd be very much like Canadian universities, where students are actually expected to be able to manage their time effectively in terms of the resources that are applied to them. Most of the assessment, for example, would be written assessment, presentations in class, that sort of thing.
Just going back to Ali Shavan, how much approximately per year would everything cost? Tuition, books, accommodation, pretty much everything. You're looking at about... So you're looking at about 20 grand for the tuition costs and about 17,000 for living expenses. So 1 year, you're not going to get much change out of $40,000 for 1 year. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, and we're not trying to kid anybody here, but need to look at it in a number of ways. Number one, you're actually converting a diploma into a fully recognized, reputable degree from a university that ranks in the top 10 in the world for criminology research. Number two, because we give so much generous credit, you're actually finishing that program relatively quickly, and therefore you're into the workforce faster. And number three, you can offset those costs quite considerably in 3 ways. Number one, as I mentioned before, you can work part-time here and earn up to $250, $300 during term time, and you can work full-time during the break. Number two, we do have scholarships for Canadian students that are coming out of college. KOM Consultants will be able to advise you on the process for applying for those scholarships. And number three, you're eligible to take your OSAP loan out of Ontario over to Australia. So there are 3 ways of actually looking at offsetting the financial costs. And the other way of looking at it is that you're getting credit from a diploma into a good degree, which reduces the amount of time that you need to study, so you're in the workforce faster. So yes, look, it's not a cheap venture, and of course you're getting a fantastic international experience. One thing worth mentioning is that we have actual evidence that of Canadian students that have gone back to Canada after graduating and were successful in getting work on the strength of the fact that their degree was done in a different country. We've had students telling us on testimonials that they were successfully appointed to a particular position, pushing out domestically educated students in Canada simply because they had gone overseas to study. So you're looking at a whole range of things. You're looking at an international experience on top of speeding up your degree, on top of being able to reduce the amount of time that you study as well. How big are the class sizes, Kerry?
The tutorials, the tutorials, we have lectures and we have tutorials or seminars. Lectures can be large. In fact, you may not experience too many very big classes. Our very big classes are in first year, and what you tend to find then is that people then will go off to other areas, and they've also got a lot more to choose from in second and third year. The first year classes tend to be fixed. They're compulsory now. You're going to miss them, or most of them, so you're probably not going to get big classes, but you're certainly going to have normal classes of about 30.
Just answering that driver's license question. Yes, a Canadian driver's license, it will be tolerated here, but but actually from a legal perspective. But it might be worth looking at getting an international driver's license at your end. We do drive on the right side of the road here. Or is it the left?
It's on the left.
I've just come from overseas myself, so...
Yes.
Yeah, we drive on the left-hand side, which is the correct side of the road, so the right side if you look at it like that. Financing is a big issue, Mr. Jones. Really my only issue. OSAP won't cover nearly enough, and I have no other support. Well, look, this is something that we can't really help you with, other than looking at maxing out your OSAP, applying for the program. If you apply to study with us and you get an offer, you're not obliged to take it immediately. There's nothing stopping you holding on to that offer and deferring a year. Alternatively, you might just want to step out of college and work for a couple of years to make that money. So, like I said, that the financial offsets will be your OSAP, the Canadian scholarships that we have, and the work eligibility rights. Outside of that, I'm afraid there's nothing much more we can do. How much realistically with scholarship grants, etc. cover? So, Mr. Jones again. Like I said, you're looking at about $37,000 to $40,000 for 1 year, all inclusive. If you max out your loan, you get the scholarship. That's about $13,000, and you can probably make about $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 per year if you really put your back into work. But my advice would be that you don't want to be flying by the seat of your pants. Okay, you don't want to be living from hand to mouth. You want to make sure that you are comfortable, because if you're stressed out about money, it will affect every aspect of your life here. You might struggle academically, you might have all kinds of issues. So my advice would be to look at the finances before you commit to a year and a half of overseas study.
I think that's a very good advice, because our local students too face exactly the same sort of problems.
Yeah.
They pay fees or they defer them until they graduate. But again, in terms of just living expenses, I mean, once you find yourself in that spiral of not being able to afford just basic living expenses, it can be very stressful.
Destiny, that's a very, very good question. The scholarship, as I mentioned, is a $3,000 scholarship that has been split into two halves. You get $1,500 per semester. You will keep that scholarship. You'll get the second installment as long as you're passing. You don't need to keep a GPA. You need to be passing everything. So you don't need to be getting credits or distinction. You will get the second half of that scholarship as long as you are satisfactorily getting through the program. The student visa, Roland, will last for as long as the program lasts. So if your credit means that you need to finish the program in 18 months, your visa will last for 1 month either side of that. You can arrive a month early and you can leave a month afterwards. So it'll be the duration of your program with a month either side. A passing grade, what's a passing grade?
50% is usually a passing grade, half marks. 50% to 65% is usually seen as a pass here, and then you go up to your credit level, which is the next 10%, and so forth until you get up to high distinctions, which are up around 90%. So a GPA here, for example, where we base everything on a 7-point scale. So a GPA of 4, for example, would be a clear.
How long does it take to start acquiring an Australian accent? Well, I would have said you'll never acquire an Australian accent, but being from England and Kerry not realising that I was from England, I'd say about probably about 8 or 9 years, I guess, depending on who you're talking to and who you're hanging around with. You'll never hear me say fair dinkum though. Okay guys, look, are there any other questions? Is there anything that we can help you with? I know we've mentioned accommodation, we've mentioned living costs, we've mentioned driver's licenses. These are all very extrinsic questions that relate to outside of your academic study. Is there anything that you'd like to know? Is there anything you'd like to know specifically about the structure of the program? As Kerry said, you're looking at 4 subjects per semester. Would you like to know more about the core subjects and the elective subjects, or the specializations within criminology and criminal justice? So Roland, he said yes.
Roland has said yes, yes. My understanding is that the only subject you actually do in first year is a research methods subject, but we realise that you come from a whole range of colleges, and so you've probably got different backgrounds. But I mean, one of the assumptions we make here with your diplomas is that you will have certainly done introductory sociology, for example. You'll have done introductory psychology, that sort of thing. So we tend to focus, what we actually ask the Canadian students to do now, and all of our students have to do this too, is we do have 5 courses which are compulsory research methods courses. So we ask you to do those compulsory research methods courses, and then after that you can pretty well tailor your program, second and third year courses. You can pretty well tailor your program around those areas that you're particularly interested in. So if you're, for example, interested in corrections, there are, we have another question.
So she'd like to specialise in youth justice or criminal mental health.
Oh, okay. Certainly, well, I teach youth justice. It's a third year course. There are other courses here in rehabilitation of offenders. We also are starting to move more and more in the area of forensic studies too. Now that can be, as you probably understand, forensics basically means anything that you can produce in court in terms of evidence. So we do have a psychology course here, for example, which is forensic psychology. And so certainly you can mix and match and tailor. As I say, our staff has now grown to about 35, and each one of those people would have 2 or
3. Do you have to take an English course, Ashley? Is English your first language? Because if it is, and you're a Canadian citizen and you're not educated in a francophone cégep in Quebec, you don't need to take an English course. Oh, unless you mean an English course to be able to understand the Australian accent when you get here. Now, Roland, I'll just answer your question. If you're a licensed carpenter in Ontario, chances are that you may find some handiwork. Again, I'm not too sure about how trades are recognised here, but you may find somebody, particularly if you become friends with Australian people here, you may be able to find a little bit of part-time that way. Can't guarantee anything. So Ashley, English is your first language. You don't need to do an English language test. Mm-hmm. You might hear a couple of phrases that you don't know, like if somebody says they're going to have a bit of Joe Blake for dinner tonight.
A bit of Joe Blake.
Bit of Joe Blake.
What, steak or?
Steak.
Oh, I almost said snake there.
Snake.
Yeah.
I thought Joe Blake is steak or snake
steak,
or whatever.
Steak, yes.
How in depth are the core subjects? So how in depth are the core subjects? Jay Fulso is looking to get into law after criminology.
Well, we actually have a joint degree with law that we do with law. Now, you actually probably wouldn't be able to do any of those courses unless you actually then move into that later on. But in depth, well, as I say, certainly those courses would be recognised by the law school here to be able to do a joint degree with law. I think at the end of the day, it's what you put into it ultimately. As I say, in the past I haven't found that Canadian students who throw themselves into the course actually have problems, but I mean it is an internationally recognised degree, our criminology degree, so yeah, we'd like to think there's depth there.
Absolutely, and just to sort of reiterate on that, there is an element of self-startership needed when you study in Australia, which means rather than actually just read the books and the courses that you're given, it's a good idea to get out and try and expand on those independently. So you get out what you put in. Mm-hmm. And that actually goes for things like finding work as well. Nobody will hand you a job, but if you're a proactive sort of person, and you network well and you talk to people, it's a combination of that little bit of paper, your qualification, and your personality. So it really is an EQ and IQ arrangement. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How much can I bring, Roland, from Canada to Australia, such as pets and computers? We have no problems with you bringing computers into the country. However, pets may have to undergo a period of quarantine. Australia is an island, which means we don't have certain animal diseases that may exist in countries with land borders with other countries. So Australia and New Zealand are very, very strict about quarantine. In fact, you cannot even drive across a state border with a bunch of bananas in the car.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really looking at quite strict regulations if you want to bring animals over. I don't know for sure, but I think you're looking at least 4 or 5 months if you want to bring an animal over or something.
I think probably. I think that would certainly be the case. And when you land here in your aircraft, you'll need to throw your fruit away that you brought over too. I was just going to say a while ago, the person who was talking about standards there, I mean, we've got a memorandum of agreement that we've just entered with Simon Fraser University in Canada now, and that's for swapping staff, for staff to be able to do changes. Now, Simon Fraser, as you probably know, does have a very good reputation in Canada in terms of technology. So certainly we're dealing with people at that level, those sort of international.
Ashley is asking if there are any electives that deal with parole or probation.
Parole and probation, you would probably get some of that in the rehabilitation course. There is a course, a very popular course here in second year, I think, rehabilitating offenders. So you would probably find that course. We've also just appointed a professor here of corrections, and my guess is he will also probably be, in fact, one of the reasons he was appointed was to build up that whole corrections area. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he edits the major journals in those areas.
Greg392 is asking how different writing assignments are in Australia from in Canada. There is some difference. I mean, from my experience in writing assignments here, they are academic. So your language quality, your construction of the assignment, your logical progression of ideas, your paragraphing will be looked at from a stylistic point of view. And Canada being, again, a Commonwealth education country, you would be strongly advised against cutting and pasting. So plagiarism is very, very badly looked on here, and can even result in, basically having that assignment ripped up and a real slap on the wrist. So in terms of assignments, you need to make sure that you are familiar with what's expected of you when you get here. You'll be expected to reference, you'll be expected to cite, and you'll also need to talk to your lecturers about exactly what format they want it in. As I mentioned, you're not thrown to the lions here. There are courses on what we call effective writing. Is that,
There are a range of people. We have a number of people here in the library. In fact, we have some people also here in the school whose job now is to help students adapt their writing styles. My feeling is that I think one of the things you're going to find at university level is that the writing is a little bit more formal. I mean, once you've learnt the rules of the game, you can handle that. But certainly I think probably the writing's a little bit more at a formal, structured level than you might get in a college.
Ashley, yes, the outlets are different in Canada. I will show you what they look like. That is what they look like. So that is your outlet. So I hope that answers your question.
You may need an adapter.
You will need an adapter. My advice again is if you're using Apple computers or you're bringing a Mac or bringing a Dell, you can actually buy sort of multi-adapters that are very good for wherever you go. And M. Bryce. Yes, there are writing workshops. In fact, what we have is we have English language provision for any student that feels that they're struggling. So it doesn't matter whether you're a native English speaker or whether you're a non-native English speaker, you still have access to writing workshops to help you with assignments. Obviously, a business report is very different from a scientific report, and so if you are struggling, there are class-free workshops that we can arrange for you. Minimum wage, Hank, is about 16 to 17 American dollars per hour. And we don't tip quite as enthusiastically as you guys do in Canada, okay? And that's why the minimum wage is so high. If you bring a laptop, yes, you'll be able to connect exactly the same as if you are in Canada. So Wi-Fi, in many respects, you won't really know that you're in a different country in terms of electronic compatibility. Now then, Miss Lady, are there a number of students being accepted per academic year, or is it open? So we have what we call an uncapped system in Australia, which means as long as the number of students does not exceed workplace health and safety, i.e. numbers of students per numbers of toilets or numbers of students per square meterage, we will take as many students that apply into a program. This does not apply to programs with quotas, which is medicine and dentistry and pharmacy and some of the health science programs. But for criminology, for business programs, for aviation, these are uncapped, which means there are no quotas. Any other queries? We're coming up to an hour now, so what we might do is we might wind it down a little bit, just to sort of reiterate some of the things we said. I mean, Kerry's very kindly talked in depth about the criminology program, and if you do have any specific questions, then by all means contact KOM Consultants, and if they don't know the answers, then they can send it on to me, and I can give Kerry a ring and we can just follow it up for you. In terms of the actual pre-departure information, you know, visa application, processes for applying for the program, use KOM. They're the ones that know a lot more about it than we do, to be honest. Is there a way, Roland, to get your phone set up for Australia? Yes, there is. I travel with my iPhone 5 back and forth from Australia to Canada all the time, and I never have any problems at all. Need to be careful about data roaming. It might be a good idea to buy what they call a travel SIM when you get here, or simply buy a prepaid phone when you get here. The Canadian dollar is a little bit weaker than the Australian dollar, but for all intents and purposes, I tend to work on it on a one-to-one basis. There is Wi-Fi in residence. There's Wi-Fi across all campuses. There's Wi-Fi in your Starbucks and your McDonald's and some of the fast food outlets. In fact, Australia is becoming very, very Wi-Fi organized. I don't even have an Ethernet cable myself. Do you have any other questions, guys? So we'll give it another minute or two, and if you don't have any information, we'll sign off. We'll be running these academic discipline-specific webinars quite regularly through KOM. So please keep an eye out on their website to see whether another criminology one is coming up. We may be able to do a Masters of Criminology one in the future. And if you look on your screen, you can always see KOM toll-free number as well there. So we will do these webinars on the strength of demand from your end. And we're more than happy to work with you guys, and we love having Canadians when they come over here. We don't need to explain the concept of a work-life balance to you. You seem to grasp that weekends are not for studying, they're for going out and partying. Okay, Roland, very quickly, what's your question, mate? We're just waiting on Roland's question. Okay, homestay accommodation, Greg. Yes, we do have homestays, and it can be arranged. It can be arranged from the accommodation website. KOM will help you with all accommodation. A homestay is very, very good if you are wanting to practice your English language, basically. But just rest assured that all our homestay families are vetted, extensively vetted actually, and every single one of them must have a blue card in order to be able to accept other people into their houses. When you graduate, now if you have done 2 years of a bachelor's degree, you can stay in Australia for 2 years after you graduate. Now the regulations and the mandate of your articulation means that you're only going to be here for 18 months, which means you will not be eligible for a post-study work visa unless you do a 2-year master's after that. Okay, everybody, I will leave it there. Destiny, Greg, Miss Lady, Roland, M. Bryce, Hank, Ashley, Jay Stewart, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. And thank you very much, Kerry, for your time.
Thank you very much. We'll see some of you.